We protect our own. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud as 200 leather-clad bikers packed every corner of Kate's struggling diner. Just 24 hours before, she had stepped in to defend a lone biker from the local police's harassment. What happened next? Well, it would change the entire town forever. Welcome to Comeback Tales. Let's dive in. Kate Morrow's hands were rough and cracked as she wiped down the sticky counter at Morrow's diner. The lunch rush had ended, if you could call it a rush, with just a handful of customers scattered around. She was mentally calculating if today's earnings would cover the overdue electric bill that lay unopened in her purse. The final notice stamp stared back at her, and with a quiet sigh, she muttered, "Just a few more months." Another empty promise she'd been making herself for nearly a year. Ever since her mother had suffered a severe stroke, Kate had taken over running the family diner, giving up her city nursing career, her apartment, and everything that came with it. Now, she was here in this small-town greasy spoon, bleeding money faster than she could patch things up. The old ceiling fan barely churned the humid summer air as it creaked above her. Outside, the main street of Dry Creek was quiet, too quiet. Since the factory had shut down its third shift, the town had been losing its pulse. The bank had foreclosed on 3 businesses already this year, and Kate wondered, with a sinking heart, if her diner might be next. The bell above the door jingled, breaking her thoughts. Her stomach tightened instinctively as a massive figure dressed in worn leather pushed through the door. The weathered face of the man was half obscured by a thick, wild beard, and faded tattoos slithered up his forearms, tales of a tough life inked beneath rolled-up sleeves. But it was the patch on his vest that made the room go deathly still, the unmistakable symbol of the Reaper crew. A chill fell over the diner. The handful of customers froze. Old Mrs. Thompson clutched her pearls in shock, while the Martin brothers, mid-bite, stopped and stared. Even the radio seemed to falter, static buzzing in the background. The biker, seemingly aware of the tension, hulkied over to the counter, every step heavy and deliberate. He chose the stool at the far end of the counter, keeping his distance from the others. Kate could almost hear her mother's voice in her head. "Everyone's money spends the same here, Kate." But her mother had never had to serve a Reaper crew member in Dry Creek, where rumors about the gang swirled like wildfire. Kate steadied herself, forced a smile, and grabbed a cloudy plastic menu along with a glass of ice water. The other waitress, Sarah, quickly disappeared, suddenly finding an urgent need to refill ketchup bottles at the far end of the diner. "Thanks for stopping by Morrow's," Kate said, keeping her voice light. "Today's special is the meatloaf, fresh out of the oven." The biker looked up at her, his pale blue eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, as if he hadn't slept in days. Against the hard lines of his face, those eyes seemed like they belonged to someone else entirely. "Coffee," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, almost tender. "Black, and whatever's fastest from the kitchen. Been on the road since sunrise." As Kate poured the coffee from the old percolator, she noticed his hands, large and calloused, built for hard labor. But there was a slight tremor to them as he grasped the mug. His knuckles were scraped raw, and a thin hospital bracelet peeked out from under his leather cuff. There was something about his demeanor, something sad, a weight she had seen before, in the faces of patients at the hospital. It was the look of someone waiting for bad news, a person keeping vigil. "Long trip ahead?" she asked casually, trying to make small talk, the way her mother had always done with customers. His massive hands wrapped around the mug like it was a lifeline, drawing warmth from the chipped ceramic. He took a long sip, then looked back at her. "Heading to St. Joseph's," he said, each word measured, as if it pained him to speak. "My daughter." Something seemed to choke him up, and for a long moment he just stared at his coffee, his fingers tightening around the mug. "My daughter," he said again, but he couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Kate's heart shifted. She didn't feel pity. He didn't want pity, but there was something familiar in the way he looked at her. The ache of a parent, worried about their child. "I'll put that order in right away," she said, her voice softening. "Toast and eggs. 6 minutes tops." The biker nodded slightly, his posture easing as he relaxed. Maybe it was the promise of food, or maybe it was just the understanding that Kate hadn't pressed him for more details. Kate turned to go, but as she did, she felt the weight of the stares from the other customers. Mrs. Thompson whispered urgently to Mrs. Henderson, and the Martins were openly glaring. Sarah, still across the room, couldn't seem to tear herself away from her ketchup bottles. Small towns had long memories, and in Dry Creek, bikers had a reputation. 20 years ago, a group of riders had torn through the town, breaking windows at the hardware store after a spat. No one knew for sure if they were part of the Reaper crew, but that didn't stop the rumors from circulating. Then, the bell jingled again. Two familiar figures walked in, Officer Collins and Officer Maxwell. They were regulars, often friendly enough, but Kate had always found Collins' swagger to be a bit much. They spotted the biker immediately, and Kate watched as Collins nudged Maxwell. They made their way to the counter, their footsteps deliberate. Well, Collins said loudly, his voice dripping with disdain. "Don't often see your kind in Dry Creek." The biker didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on his coffee. "Just passing through," he said quietly. "Needed some food." Kate set the plate of toast and eggs down in front of him, but before he could respond, Collins spoke again. "How about checking his ID, Kate? Make sure he's not one of those Reapers we've been warned about." The biker reached slowly into his pocket, but Collins' hand shot to his holster. "Careful now," Collins warned. Kate felt the heat rise in her chest. Her fingers clenched around the edge of the counter, but she refused to let herself back down. "He's a paying customer, Collins. Just like you." The diner went still. No one spoke to Officer Collins that way. Collins' eyes narrowed, and for a moment, it seemed like he might escalate things. But then, something shifted in the air. He scoffed and leaned back in his seat. "Not just like me," Collins sneered. "His kind bring trouble. Drugs. Violence." The biker looked up, his pale blue eyes cold now, voice still quiet but firm. "You don't know the first thing about me, officer." Collins leaned in closer, the tension thick enough to slice. "I know what that patch means," he growled. The biker's fingers gripped his coffee mug a little tighter. "That patch doesn't mean what you think it does." Before the conversation could go further, Maxwell spoke up, his voice almost bored. "Maybe we should run your plates. See what comes up." A few patrons glanced over nervously, some nodding along with the officers, others visibly uncomfortable. Kate could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her. The biker set his fork down, his voice catching a bit as he spoke. "I'm just here to eat. I'm heading to St. Joseph's. My daughter," his voice faltered again, the words too heavy to say. He seemed to gather himself before continuing. "She's not doing well." Collins chuckled darkly. "Oh, of course. Sick family member." The old classic excuse. Something inside Kate snapped. She wasn't sure if it was the memory of her own mother in the hospital, the helplessness she had felt, or just a boiling sense of injustice. But she couldn't let this continue. "That's enough," she said, her voice sharper than she had intended, cutting through the tension. "You're done harassing my customer, Collins." The diner went completely silent. For a split second, Kate thought Collins might lose control, but instead, he just glared at her. "You heard me," she said, standing her ground. "He came in for a meal. He's been nothing but polite, and you're treating him like a criminal." The room was still. Everyone waited for Collins' reaction. "You don't know who you're defending, Kate," Officer Maxwell warned, his tone low, cold. I'm defending a customer, Kate replied, her voice steady, despite the pounding of her heart. And unless you have a reason to suspect him of something other than the way he's dressed, I'd appreciate it if you let him eat in peace. Colin stood up, towering over her now, his voice dripping with anger. Your father would be real disappointed to see you take sides against the law. The words hit hard. Kate's stomach twisted, but she kept her chin up. My father taught me to judge people by their actions, not their appearance, she shot back. And right now, you're the one acting badly in my diner. The tension in the room grew unbearable. Finally, the biker spoke, his voice quiet but firm. I think I'll take my food to go, he said, reaching for his wallet. No, Kate's voice rang clear and firm, stopping him. Your money's no good here today. The meal's on me. The biker blinked, surprise flickering across his weathered face, followed by genuine gratitude. He nodded slowly, taking the gesture in with a heavy heart. Collins, now visibly flushed, threw a few crumpled bills on the counter. Lost my appetite, he muttered, then, with a final scowl, turned on his heel. Let's go, Maxwell. The bell above the door jingled angrily behind them as they left. The silence that followed was almost worse than the confrontation itself. Kate turned to the biker, who sat staring at the empty plate in front of him. He finally looked up at her, his eyes softening. Thank you, he said quietly. Not many people would have done what you just did. Kate didn't know how to respond, but before she could speak, he added, Name's Ree Mercer. Kate Morrow, she said, offering him a smile. I'm glad I could help. He stood to leave, but paused, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a $20 bill. For your mother, he said simply, before heading toward the door. Kate stood there, her heart a mix of gratitude and confusion. She hadn't done this for the money, but the gesture was so kind it took her breath away. That night, as Kate sat at her mother's bedside at the care facility, she thought over the events of the day. I don't know if I did the right thing, Mom, she murmured to her mother's unresponsive form, the sadness weighing heavily on her. But I couldn't just stand by. Her mother's eyes, still full of wisdom despite her condition, seemed to hold approval. Or maybe it was just what Kate wanted to see. Either way, it gave her strength. The next morning, Kate arrived at the diner to find a note taped to the door, closed until further notice. No biker lovers in Dry Creek. The red marker smeared across the note, and Kate's hands trembled as she ripped it down. The message was clear. Inside, the diner was eerily quiet. The usual chatter, the clinking of silverware, had all but disappeared. A few loyal regulars trickled in, offering small gestures of support, but Kate knew the town was turning against her for standing up to the police. At 2 p.m., the diner was almost empty. Kate leaned against the counter, fighting back tears. The diner wasn't just a business. It was her mother's legacy. Now, it might all vanish because she had stood up for a stranger. But just as she let herself feel the weight of it, the familiar sound of engines filled the air. She looked out the window to see the street slowly filling with motorcycles. At first, just a few, then more and more. In no time, there were over 200 bikers, men and women of all ages, wearing the unmistakable colors of the Reaper crew. Kate stood frozen, her jaw hanging open. They're here for you, Kate, a familiar voice said from behind her. It was Ree's brother, Thomas Mercer, standing in the doorway with his wife, Sarah. They heard about what you did for Ree, Sarah said. He called in some favors. Word spread fast in our community. Kate moved to the window, still stunned as motorcycle after motorcycle roared into the parking lot. One by one, the bikers dismounted, removing their helmets, stretching their limbs, and filling the diner. They were respectful, polite, and each one ordered with cash in hand, leaving generous tips. I don't know how to thank you, Kate said, Her voice filled with awe as Marcus, the Riverside chapter president, approached her. "You don't need to thank us," he said. "You showed us respect when no one else would. Now, we're showing you ours." Over the next few hours, the diner buzzed with life. The bikers were kind, even to the regulars who had hesitated at first. Mrs. Thompson found herself chatting with a biker grandmother about quilting, and Dave Martin discovered a fellow Vietnam vet among the riders. As the sun set, Ree walked in again, this time with a smile on his face. "The treatment's working," he said, his voice full of relief. "My daughter's numbers are better. She's had a chance now." Kate impulsively hugged him, and he hugged her back, grateful. Then the unthinkable happened. Marcus stood up, and the entire diner fell silent. "From now on, this diner is under the protection of the Reaper crew," he declared. "Anyone who gives Kate trouble for who she chooses to serve will answer to us." The room erupted in cheers. By the end of the evening, Kate had made more money than she had in the past 2 weeks combined. But more than that, she had gained something invaluable. Respect, not just from bikers, but from a town that had seen beyond the leather jackets and tattoos to the human heart inside. And as Kate locked up the diner that night, she noticed a leather vest hanging behind the counter, a note pinned to it. "For the bravest diner owner we know." When Officer Collins walked in the next morning, unusually subdued, Kate served him coffee with the same smile she'd always offered. After all, her mother had taught her to judge people by how they act, not what they wear. And that's the story of Kate Morrow and how a single act of courage turned a small-town diner into a symbol of hope and change. Sometimes, all it takes is standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a little inspiration, and of course, subscribe to Comeback Tale for more stories that show the power of kindness, courage, and the unexpected ways we can change the world. Also, check out the video on your screen right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep coming back for more tales of comeback and redemption. Take care, and remember, sometimes the best way to make a comeback is to just